Good morning, NSFers. Welcome to our presentation today. I hope everybody is staying safe during these challenging times. We look forward to our discussion today by Kerry Nemovicher of Crytica Security, and we will get started in just a minute with his presentation. But before we do that, I'd like to make sure that you are aware of our upcoming presentations. So Kerry is presenting today, and we have a follow-on presentation on the 29th of October. It is a follow-on to our discussion and our event that we had in mid-September when we had the senior representatives from the START Institute talking about domestic extremism. And there were several questions during our presentation at that time that hit on the topic of how is the information that the researchers are developing on the rise and fall of different extremist groups, how is that information being conveyed to law enforcement officials and intelligence officials? And we didn't have anybody on at the time who could answer those questions. So we are very lucky that we have Al Reshaw, who is a retired police captain and a retired naval intelligence officer, and who is local to our area. Al will be presenting, leading a panel discussion on that topic on the 29th of October. We also have a very interesting talk coming up on the 19th of November. We have Dr. Andrew Bacevich, who is emeritus at Boston University, and he's also a colleague of Ty's, and they both taught together at West Point many, many years ago. And Dr. Bacevich will be presenting about presentation about American power. He just put out a very interesting article in The Atlantic recently, and I will be sending a link to that along with the announcement. And on December 3rd, we finally have our long-awaited panel discussion on the future of Afghanistan. So Dr. Andrew Wilder will be presenting. Dr. Wilder is the Vice President of the Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C., and he will be presenting his perspective on the situation in Afghanistan. And then we will have several of our esteemed colleagues from NSF on a panel providing rejoinder and questions and discussions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kerry Nemovicher, who, among other things, is the CEO of Crytica Security locally. He's a Reno native, and he will be presenting. And I have to give one piece of color, is that Kerry is also a dance instructor for local folk dancing. So if you need some quicken your step while you're listening to cybersecurity, please be in touch with Kerry after the presentation. So with that, I turn it over to Kerry. Thank you very much all for being with us. Please put your questions in the Q&A box or the chat box. And with that, we will get started. Thank you.
I appreciate everybody showing up this morning. And today we're going to take a dive into cybersecurity, kind of bit of an overall view, and then a deeper dive into one aspect of it, which we're calling, if we can't detect, we can't protect. But before I do, I have a favor to ask of all of you. Please do not leave your common sense and critical thinking at the door. Too often people see cybersecurity as being something, mystical, arcane, impossible to understand for us mere mortals. It's not true. We can understand all of it. And it is important that we understand all of it, because without that understanding, none of the technological innovations will help us. So let's dive in and I'll show you what I mean. First of all, the why of cybersecurity should be very clear. The existential threat of war, and warfare is the norm in human history rather than the exception. Peace is the exception. And so we always need to be prepared for war. And the face of war is changing. War is having now a very strong cyber security or cyber element to it. Cyber warfare is, if not completely here, then it is certainly coming rapidly. And some of the headlines that we've seen recently have given hints of this, of what's going on. Iran attacks Israel, Israel strikes back and attacks Iran. People talk about this hidden war between Israel and Iran. And true, cyber warfare for the time being is very clandestine and very secret, but some of it does spill out into the open. And as this headline speaks, it says Israel and Iran just showed us the future of cyber warfare with their unusual attacks. Well, for people who have been following this, these attacks are not quite unusual, but it is the future, whether we like it or not. And so how far along is cyber warfare technology? What stage are we at? Well, permit me to use an analogy. In August of 1914, airplanes and armor were not really taken seriously as methods of warfare. I mean, airplanes, they were a curiosity. Yes, you might use them in conjunction with spotter balloons and things like that, observation balloons. They could help the artillery. They might find enemy positions, but as a weapon of war, nobody really took them very seriously. And armor, tanks, that's where the stuff you found in the drawings of Leonardo da Vinci and the sci-fi stories of H.G. Wells. However, by November of 1918, they had begun to play a major part in the war. They weren't the crucial weapons of the war, but they were certainly palpable and they had an effect on the war. We had airplanes and we had tanks. However, a mere generation later, less than 25 years later, as World War II broke out, any country that didn't have armor and air power in significant numbers had no chance in fighting. Warfare had become very much a function of armor and air power. So where do we stand right now in terms of our development in cyber warfare? My estimation is that we are probably, if not at August of 1914, maybe we're back in May or June of 1914. We're just beginning to get there. We're just beginning to understand that, hey, these things are going to be components, they're going to be useful. How they're going to be used, we haven't yet really fully understood. So how well is the United States and the world ready for cyber warfare? Well, we have one serious problem, and that's the cyber criminals are winning. And we look at the civilian side of the world simply because so much of the military is clandestine and we haven't been able to look at it and nobody's really willing to speak about it. But we do have statistics when it comes to cyber criminals. And it turns out, according to IBM, that cyber criminals are earning $1.5 trillion per annum. That is an enormous amount of money. That is 3 times the world trade in illegal drugs. So when you talk about organized crime, their big business is cybercrime, not drugs. If cyber criminals were a country unto themselves, they would be the 13th largest economy in the world. I mean, $1.5 trillion, that's the GDP of Russia. All right? Cyber criminals are definitely winning. And according to Forbes, the US has dropped from the 5th most cyber secure country in the world to the 17th most secure country in the world. However, I know some of you have seen the recent article in The Economist, which gives a little different perspective on that, and we'll talk about that later on in the discussion. But in any event, what we're seeing is, despite enormous increases in cybersecurity spending, expected to get to close to 134 billion by the end of 2022, the cyber criminals are doing very, very well. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, why? What's going on with all this money being spent? Well, I think we need to go back to the very basics. I need to think we go back to common sense. And what do I mean by that? Let's take a look at a few examples of where common sense is missing in the cybersecurity world. We're all familiar with, reset your password and all the rest of this. And obviously, a password is how you identify yourself, and you don't want the bad guys getting that. So we want as strong a password as we can possibly have. Well, typically, the strength of the password is based on two things: the length of the password, which will increase the number of permutations that you can have, and also the lack of use of fairly obvious things. I mean, for the longest time, you could get into any Unix, Linux system as a root administrator, well, not any, but most of them, using either Superman, root, or Gandalf. I mean, these were things that people just used, and of course, the bad guys knew it. And of course, if you put in as your password the word password, or my name, or the name of your kids, it's pretty easy for them to guess. The other way for them to attack, the bad guys to attack, is simply use brute force. I mean, these are computers. And as computers, you can try every single possible permutation to get to where you want to go. Well, obviously, the longer the password, the more permutations you have, and the harder it is for a brute force attack. So limiting the password to 8 characters doesn't make a lot of sense. However, this is something that many companies, including American Express for their credit card holders, for years limited you to 8 characters. Why? That's a long story. Makes no sense. But that's really not what I want to look at here, because we can go back and forth on the obvious. The other thing on this that catches my attention even more is that they require us at least 1 capital letter, 1 lowercase letter, and a number. Ostensibly, this is to make us more secure. Really? If we're just looking at, let's say, an 8-character password, by putting this requirement in, we are reducing the number of permutations by a couple of 100,000, not increasing them. We are making ourselves weaker. Why? Because some technocrat at the NSA opined way back around 2003, 2004 that, hey, this would be a good idea if we required it, not thinking of the ramifications, not thinking of the mathematics, and then a couple of years later rescinded that and say, oh, that wasn't such a good idea. But by then the cat was out of the bag and everybody was following this unquestionably. Where's the critical thinking? Where's the common sense? There wasn't any, and there still isn't. All right. We all know it's important to read the fine print and go down to the bottom. And you may not be able to read this slide, but at the bottom it says, by continuing to use this site, you agree to our use of cookies. What the heck is a cookie? Except for that nice, sweet thing you get on holidays and special occasions, and my mother used to have with her warm milk at night before going to sleep. A cookie is a file that a website drops down onto your computer. You are not aware of when they do it. You're not aware how they do it. You're not aware of what's in that. But if you use their site, you are agreeing to them putting information on your machine. It could be something as innocuous as your color preferences, or it could be something as nasty as ransomware. You don't know, but you're agreeing to allow them to do that. And so they are absolved of any responsibility. Common sense? I don't think so. Let's take it even further. This is an actual image of an email that I received from my Citibank Costco card. I did blank out my card number, but otherwise this is an exact image of what I received. And they want me to update my information, or at least review my information. Now, let's take a step back. How does all this ransomware get out there? That's a problem. We all know, oh, I go to a nasty website, I shouldn't click on something that I don't know, right? And if I had gotten an email from some very rich Nigerian prince who has promised me all kinds of money, by now I would know not to click on the links in there as well. But this, oh, this came from my bank. What's the problem of clicking on this little link and going to the website? Well, first of all, you don't really know that this came from the bank. Just as I made a copy of the email here, nefarious characters could make a copy of this just as well and send it to you. And then behind this little link over here, when you clicked on it, instead of going to Citibank's website, in the best case scenario, you would wind up at a website that looked exactly like Citibank's, with the login and the password, and you would put in your login and your password, and boom, your identity is toast. And you say, hey, they stole my identity. No, you gave it away, right? Very bad idea to put links into emails that we have no idea what's behind them. And yet, this is a common practice. We don't want to get people used to the idea that it's okay to click on links in an email. If you want them to go to the website, then you put down the URL, you put down something that they can cut and paste, but don't give a hidden link. And this is not just limited to the banks and Costco. We take a company like Verizon, which is considered and considers itself one of the experts in cybersecurity. They publish papers, they publish reports, they give courses about how to make your security more secure. And in this particular email that I got from them, they promise they'll not call and they'll not send us emails requesting our username or our password access because, you know, we all know that that is not secure. And yet they feel no qualms about sending us an email with embedded links to click on. Where's the common sense? We're only looking at a piece of the picture, and this is very common. I would say it's endemic to our cybersecurity industry. It's tunnel vision. It's putting a steel drawer on a straw house. Sure, that door is nice and solid and secure, but hey, what about the windows and what about all the rest of it? That is a problem. It is what I also call the wall-based defense mentality. All right, oh, I'm secure, I've got a firewall, or I'm secure, I have whitelisting, or I'm secure. And we have all of these individual things that we rely on for our security. Anybody who has studied history understands that walls have never worked. They are only tactical devices for temporarily slowing down the enemy. They're not strategic. They don't solve problems. But one of the problems with a wall is once I put it up, it buys me a false sense of security. Oh, that wall is going to solve my problem for me. It doesn't. And that is, again, one of our problems. We have this wall, and these guys say, hope and pray they don't go around the side. What happens if they do? Anybody have a plan B, a contingency plan? If you are a high value target and I'm a malefactor and I want to get into your computer system, the first thing I'm going to do is go after your virus scanner or your firewall or any of your single line defenses. If I go after your virus scanner and I can get in, because there is no such thing as an impregnable wall. There's no such thing as software that cannot be invaded and disabled. If I can get into your firewall or I can get into your virus scanner, I'm in, especially since virus scanners are written with such hubris that they say, oh, we're a virus scanner. Nobody's going to get into us, and they run with administrative permission, root permission. That's the permission to do anything on the machine. So if I can get in and subvert your virus scanner, I'm in. I've got the keys to the kingdom. Nothing you can do. Single point catastrophic failure. No plan B. All right. So now let's take a look. We're going to take a deeper dive into one of the most significant problems out there, and I call it the invisible tiger in the room, even though it's not quite invisible. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's what's called the dwell time, the average time to detect malware. You realize that that is greater than 6 months. The last report I saw said 197 days. Well, if we can't detect the malware, we can't protect. And think about the ramifications. What does 6 months mean? Well, that recent attack, ransomware that took out that medical hospital system, that didn't happen all in one fell swoop. The system was invaded, and slowly but surely, it spread its tentacles out to all the different computers that it wanted to attack. And then when it was ready to attack, bam, it hit them all at the same time. It gives you 6+ months of malware propagation. It also gives you 6+ months of data harvesting, pulling in all this confidential data. And a lot of that confidential data can be data on how to attack your system more efficiently and how to get in. 6 months in computer terms is a lifetime. And yet, we have this invisible tiger in the room, greater than 6 months dwell time. Typical cybersecurity vendors, I just pulled this all from one of them. Oh yeah, your email is protected, your apps are secured, your network is secured, your data are secured. Whoa, wait a second. If we can't detect, we can't protect. What is this you're telling me? This is marketing hype and buzzwords. Things like everybody's talking today about zero trust networks. What does that mean, zero trust networks? That's a logical impossibility, and yet it's being bantered around all over. Okay, so we looked at common sense. Now I'm going to show you how at least this one problem has been solved. And now we can reduce the average dwell time to below 6 minutes. Indeed, we have the software that can, instead of 197 days, we can reduce the dwell time to under 197 seconds. So now we can protect, therefore we can protect. And now I want to explain to you, because it's important that you understand how and why and what the issues are. The original virus scanners, they were like a dictionary lookup. A computer virus is a computer program, it's code. And if I know what that code looks like, I can go through all of the files on your computer looking for that piece of code. It's like somebody who is a censor, they want to borderize my library or make it politically correct or whatever. And they have this book of forbidden words and forbidden phrases. And then they take this little book and they go through all of my library and they look for those phrases. Great. It either finds it or it doesn't find it. But one of the things that's been a characteristic of malware for the last, 7 or 8 years, is that any reasonable malware writer writes malware that self-morphs. In other words, it changes different pieces of itself so that it doesn't look exactly the way it looked a day ago. All right, well, we responded with artificial intelligence, which a lot of people say that will be our savior. And we can have a long conversation about AI, but that's not the topic today. And so they came up with what I call the thesaurus lookup as opposed to the dictionary lookup. Virus scanners that use artificial intelligence pattern matching. So now instead of looking for an exact match on the forbidden word in my library, I look for the forbidden word plus synonyms, things that are similar. The problem with this approach, with both of these approaches, is one very simple fact, that there are over 300,000 new, what are called zero-day attacks, zero-day malware attacks, variants per day. Do you realize how big that dictionary book needs to be and how often I need to update it? It's simply not feasible. Good idea, but not feasible in the face of the enemy that we are confronting. So they said, all right, well, AI, that's got to save us. Let's take a look at pattern matching, how the attacks come in with a certain pattern. And I see an attack here, and then I say, gee, that looks kind of similar. And then when I see this attack coming in the third time, I say, aha, that must be a malware attack. But again, the problem is attack patterns are infinite and constantly changing. And so people said, instead of looking at the hardware and the software, let's look at humans. And this is the latest big thing out of companies like Darktrace and other companies out there. We're going to look at how humans behave. So they put a little box on your network and it monitors all the activity. And if I go in every day and first thing I do in the morning is I log into the Wall Street Journal and see what's going on. If one day I decide to go in and I log into the Economist, bam, I've got anomalous behavior. I'm not doing what I usually do. Now that's a spurious example. More to the point was, let's say I'm sending 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 emails every day back and forth to my bank, let's say to Chase. And one day I start sending an equivalent number of emails to some bank over in Shanghai. Hey, wait a second, that might be a problem. Now, there are ways, and again, in Q&A, I will tell you how to defeat this. But for the time being, if I have a very well-regulated environment, have no creativity, nobody thinking outside the box and whatnot, this is can be a reasonable tool. However, the problem with all of the AI, artificial intelligence-based systems is that they are plagued by massive, massive false positives. False positives are when it says, hey, I found something when there really wasn't there. Like, oh, hey, Kerry logged into The Economist. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Why did you issue an alarm? Well, it was anomalous behavior. The false positives are so great that the best of these systems that I have seen so far claim that they can get up to only 52% false positives, to which I always respond, 52%? I've got a better system. Why don't you just flip a coin? Then you'll have a 50-50 chance of getting it correct. It's causing companies tremendous losses. I've heard statistics which say up to 25% of their cyber resources are being spent chasing after false positives. That's like a full week, a month. I mean, it's unconscionable. It's a problem. So how do we solve this problem? Let's go back to some common sense dwell-time solution and see what it is they were doing and what it is that needs to be done. To detect malware, first of all, it is not necessary to first identify it. And that has been the major problem. We've been going after malware by trying to identify it, which in order to identify it means we've either seen it or similar behavior before. In other words, we're looking at the past. We're not looking at the future. And what do they say on those ads on TV or the radio? Past performance is no guarantee of future, blah, 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 blah. Right? Well, you cannot drive down the highway looking only in the rearview mirror. You need to look forward. You need another way of going about this. And again, this is why I say this is common sense. Common sense would say, hey, we need to have something that doesn't rely on the past in order to identify future attacks. And I've got a story about that for Q&A if you want as well. However, the takeaway here, the understanding, the insight, the second piece of it is computer operations are discrete sets of instructions. As evil and malicious as my computer seems to me, especially when I'm playing chess with it and I think it has a nasty sense of humor, it doesn't, all right? It does only what it's told to do, and what it's told to do is encompassed in its programs and its instructions. So if we think about that, the computer has a set of authorized instructions. So any unauthorized change to those instructions, it doesn't matter what that change does. If it's an unauthorized change, that is malware. And it may be spyware that sits there that doesn't look like it's doing anything nasty. But if I didn't put it intentionally on my computer, it is malware. And let's not bring up the question of cookies again. But therefore, to detect malware, what we need to do is detect unauthorized changes to software programs, firmware, etc. That's it. That's the common sense solution. Now, it's a common sense solution to build it and implement it. That is fairly complex and very sophisticated, but the concept is simple. So to revisit what we've been doing before, I know matrices, all this nonsense. The things up on top is immunity to false positives. And going back to our virus dictionary back then, it doesn't have any false positives. It's either a match to the virus or it's not a match to the virus. It's a yes or no. It's a binary situation. But it cannot detect the zero-day attacks, the new attacks. As we bring in the AI, we start to be able to detect some of the attacks we haven't seen before, but they are very, very, very vulnerable to false positives. The system that I just showed you, which we're doing in Crytica, not only do we have no false positives, because again, either there was a change or there was no change. Either it was authorized or it wasn't authorized. That's a binary situation. No gray area there. And so far, all our tests that we've thrown at this thing, we've detected every single change we've seen, whether anybody has seen that change in the past or not. So I'm going to claim that, yeah, we have finally solved this problem and we've gotten rid of that big, almost invisible tiger in the room. So let's go back to being prepared for cyber warfare. And I'm going to maintain that our status quo infrastructure of security theater is not the answer. Hype, technobabble, they may work when you're making a sales pitch, but they're not effective against malware. And unfortunately, large organizations have proven themselves to be too bureaucratic to be truly innovative. And we could have a whole discussion and a whole lecture as to why that is so. But history has shown that it is so. Even organizations that started out as being small and efficient and innovative, as they grew, that innovation dropped tremendously. There are two, that's not National Institute of Health, it's not invented here syndrome, NIH. They're too prone to saying, hey, we didn't invent it, can't be any good. And there are lots of reasons why they want to say that. And they have a penchant for embedded proprietary solutions. Hey, we've got the solution in there. We don't want to touch it. All right? Even if it's not working, we still don't want to touch it. Government grants are very ineffective for funding true innovation, at least those that I have seen. Government grants, rather than saying, here's a problem, how do you solve it? They typically say, here's a problem, and here's the general way we want you to solve it. They're not thinking outside the box, and they don't let you think outside the box because they've already given you the framework, and chances are a bureaucrat or a technocrat has written those specifications. So what do we do? How do we truly prepare for cyber warfare? Well, it's been my experience that authentic innovation comes mostly from small companies and individuals who are working to solve problems without the constraints that large organizations put upon them. Small, innovative companies, they're constantly creating new solutions. But how do we get these solutions? I think we need to create something equivalent to the Manhattan Project, that created the atomic bomb during World War II. But there, the government could go to large industry and academia because that was the source of creativity in those days. But now, we need to find another way of tapping into these companies. We need to find these small companies. And I'm going to be egotistical and say small companies like Crytica Security. And we need to find more effective ways to fund these companies because believe me, as CEO, I would love to be spending my time on the technology, but I'm spending most of my time trying to figure out how to fund this company and where we're getting the next group of funding in from. Bottom line is that the decision makers need to understand the issues. We can't abrogate our responsibilities. Decision makers need more education to demystify things like cybersecurity. And I hope I've been showing you today issues that cybersecurity is not that mysterious. All right? We cannot let the technocrats make the decisions for us. They're not strategic thinkers. But it takes courage to learn. and adapting frameworks of thought. You know, any of us who's reached any level of seniority, whether we're a manager, an executive, a professor, or whatnot, we're used to being in the situation where we are the ones who know. And it's very difficult to put ourselves into that situation and say, oops, now I'm the one who doesn't know. I need to learn new things. But in this world, we constantly need to learn new things. It takes courage to understand the realities of cyber warfare. But without that courage, we're going to be leading cavalry charges against panzer divisions. It just doesn't work. The world is changing and we need to change with it. It takes courage, but only courage wins wars. And now I would like to jump very quickly into a postscript if I have the time.
You have less than 1 minute, Kerry.
Less than 1 minute. All right, then really quickly. We saw this statistic from Forbes. Do we believe it? Well, now we have the statistic from The Economist. Do we believe it? Look where the United States is. And by the way, look where Israel is. Does this pass the smell test? I say it doesn't. We get lots and lots and lots of statistics and quantitative data, and especially in something that is so secretive. Where are they getting this data from? I have the original report, by the way, from the Belfer Institute, if anybody wants to see it. They got it all from public information. That is no way to deal with this world. If you look at numbers, just numbers, take a look. Before World War II, France, not only did they have the Maginot Line, but they so outnumbered the Germans. There's no way the Germans could attack France and win. We take a look at Japan. There's no way Japan could attack China and win. And the United States, I mean, we had a smaller army than Romania, Spain, and Switzerland. We could not be a factor in that war at all. This is what numbers give you. But Napoleon knew what he was talking about in 1809. It's not just the numbers. We pay lip service to security, but are we really committed to it? We invest enormous budgets into cybersecurity, but do we spend those funds intelligently? Do we truly think critically, or are we merely drinking the Kool-Aid? We need to think critically. What do you think? Thank you. Did I make it, Maureen?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much, Kerry. I really appreciate your insight and demystifying cybersecurity. That was exceedingly helpful. Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick rejoinder, and please, if anybody has questions, please put them either in the Q&A box or the chat box. I'll be happy to pick up both. Thanks.
So I'm going to move really fast. Kerry presented some really, really amazing information, and some of this is going to apply. It's going to create some discord in your mind as far as how things are going. But so I'm taking this information largely from a very recently released RAND report on cyber threats. There's two of them actually. One's on cyber threats and the other one is on public opinion and external sources. So those are both available. If you want to email any one of us, I'll have my email at the end of this, and we're happy to share that with you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the topics that Mike Matthews was going to talk about. However, I can speak slightly more freely because I'm not on the payroll of DHS. So on that note, this is a discussion about the RAND election supply chain security analysis, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that process is, who are the key stakeholders, and a vulnerability analysis of that. So supply chain stakeholders are essentially the voters themselves, are the consumers, if you will. And in the process, you have the polling system, the election system, which would be the polling book, the polling booths, those computer systems, the tabulation and calculation, which goes from precinct to district to state, and then ultimately to federal. And then that data is pushed to websites, what the news and various other bodies, as well as the secretaries of state and local recorders, use to present the information out. There's basically on the RAND report, about 28 vendors involved in this. 3 major vendors comprise 90% of the voting machines in place. They're largely smaller firms, They don't have the level of supply chain auditing that we see in the Department of Defense process as far as their data analysis. And so that presents some 3 significant risks, which Kerry did talk a bit about those, which are the confidentiality attacks, which is essentially stealing your data and your credentials. Limited PII voting records don't have a lot of personal identifiable information. The integrity attacks and the availability attacks, of course, are very high priorities right now for election security. They're really looking at this very closely, and there's been some very good moves in the defense of these things, or at least monitoring these. On the open source, and to the last point that Kerry just made, open source information is only going to give you a very, very sanitized output of what is really happening. There are a lot of validation processes that are being used for election security. They are not releasing. The different monitoring agencies, government agencies that are looking at this, including the military apparatus, are looking very closely at this, and they're not telling you how they're going about doing it for obvious reasons, because that shows your hand, so to speak. A lot of precincts have moved to the .gov platforms, which then allow those federal resources to look at those security protocols. And and at this point, election security has moved to about the top of the priority scale as far as open source information has presented out to us. There's a lot of discussion and dialogue about what can be done, what can't be done, how long it's going to take to address the paper ballots. There's a lot of discussion in that area, particularly in the media and on social media, which should be all taken with a big grain of salt these days. There is a very heavy multi-validation process that's going to be utilized for both electronic voting as well as paper voting and in-person voting. The challenge, of course, is that we're probably going to be seeing some delays as far as accurate reporting of the results of these elections, which, of course, is being amplified by adversaries to our state. Foreign interference, technology, social media, and psychology. This is a report also available to you. I really highly recommend you all get this and read this and understand what's going on right now. We are being, there's a lot of manipulation going on right now. If you go, as Kerry mentioned, the first thing he does in the morning, go to the Wall Street Journal. If you look at that, the top center is how Russia today skirts high-tech blockade to reach US readers. There is a lot of very specific targeting in our media and our social media by Russia to produce conflict. This is affecting our election cycle as well. These are the findings from the report. You can read faster than I can speak, and Maureen's got me at 90 seconds right now, so we're on a fast track countdown. It's kind of like the disclaimer on the television ads. I do recommend you read through this. They are using some very specific things to manipulate mainstream media. This unnamed sources bit you really need to pay attention to, and to Kerry's earlier point, critical thinking is probably something we really need to pay attention to right now. These are some of the strategies that are being done. Those of you that have read Dr. Kahneman's work or Dr. Tversky's work, Tversky's work, a lot of these things are being amplified right now to the general public of the United States, and it's sowing a great deal of discord. These are the objectives that are identified by Russia. This is obviously going to come into play again. And then lastly, I have some rhetorical questions. And this goes back to that critical thinking. And I think I'm down to 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. There's my email address, so send your hate mail to me.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for putting it in the perspective of the election security. I know that's what's on everybody's mind right now. I'm going to move quickly to Q&A, and I'm also going to call on Al and our panelist, Al and Charles, in a minute, but let me get to a few quick questions for Kerry that you could have anticipated. The first one is, okay, so you warned us about cookies, and other than going on a diet, how do we get rid of them?
Unfortunately, we cannot. I opt out of cookies wherever I can, and it annoys my bank and it annoys me. There are ways in your browser where you can say don't accept cookies, but then some websites won't talk to you. You're going to have to find something in the middle. I set my browser so that every time I close the browser, it erases all the cookies. But of course, if I've gotten a ransomware attack, the moment it's on my machine, it's starting to do its thing, and there's not much I can do about it. The only thing I can say is social pressure back to your banks and other websites and say, hey guys, let's get real about this. Why are you still using cookies? They made sense in the 1990s. They don't make sense today.
Excellent, thank you. So a follow on to that is password managers. So when you gave that little password, you know, you always click in that box and it says, I can randomly generate a password for you. Is that a good idea?
Yes and no. It is a good idea for most people. The problem is with when you have a password generator, you need to get into that password generator. How do you authenticate yourself into that password generator? I need an ID and a password. And so it could become a single point catastrophic failure if somebody can get into your password manager or your password generator. But it's certainly better for most people than to just, oh, my dog's name is such and such. But it'll help if you use longer passwords. Remember, we use the term password, but many of these things accept passphrases, which are easier to remember. Or I happen to be a little bit of a polyglot. I write my passwords in multiple languages, which also makes them more difficult and longer. It's your choice.
Excellent, excellent. And those passwords, we typically store them in a keychain of some sort because we can't remember them all, or we don't want them all to be the same. Is that a good idea?
It depends. Actually, I do store my passwords in a encrypted spreadsheet, but encryption can be broken as well. But there again, I use allusions rather than the password itself. So for example, if I want to use someone's birthday, I'll put like their initials and, you know, DDMMYYYY as part of that. Rather than explicitly writing the password there, I disguise it. Or again, I use another language. So instead of the word password, for example, I use Hebrew sisma. So it's written in the spreadsheet, but it's not directly. Even if somebody gets into the spreadsheet, they're going to still have to figure out how I've been disguising them.
Got it. Excellent. And malware. You said good things and bad things, lots of bad things about malware. Is there a way to know whether malware is a good thing to have on your computer? And
No,
if so,
malware is a bad thing. Malware is another term for.
I meant malware defense. Sorry, I meant security against malware.
Oh yeah. I do not want to denigrate what's out there. I mean, you still have a lot of the kiddie scripts out there and whatnot. They will protect you against the amateur criminals. It's like having an alarm system in your house, right? It will protect you against the amateur criminals. Professional criminals, you're a high value target. They're going to get through that system. But again, how many of us are high value targets? It's depending on how much you need to defend yourself, right? Defenses should be proportionate to the level of attack expected.
Excellent, thank you. Charles, I see you're up. Do you have questions for our panelists or comments on what was just said?
Yeah, no, I have a question for the gentlemen that were both presenting. What are your feelings on the third-party authenticators? Do they do what they're supposed to? Should they be more widely used? Like, as you said, that, you know, banks, they want to do the cookies, but what are your feelings on those third-party, like Duo Mobile, Authenticator? Are those another line of defense, and do you see those being attacked as well?
Obviously, yes. Again, they are useful. They're, you know, when you can spread, military terms, you can spread your forces out and don't give the enemy one target, one single point to go after. It makes it more difficult for them. However, if you have a company, I'll call it just authenticated ABC, and I know that they're authenticating lots and lots and lots of different companies, who am I going to go after? I'm going to go after them because they're the back door in. So it's, you know, it's like the old spy versus spy. It's a moving game. Nothing is static here. All right. And I can't give you a direct, yes, this is the way to go. There is no, yes, this is the way to go. We need to stay nimble.
Yeah, thank you.
On that note, there, I recall a pretty significant attack that was mounted against large networks that found the weakest link was through printer protocols. So they just got in through the system by just going into to a very, very low grade security on network printers. You know, you really have to look at these, you know, at this idea of network security. It was described to me by a science officer from McAfee Software that you're attempting to waterproof a large submarine that was manufactured out of screen door material. Yeah. There's holes. The entire thing is built with holes. So now you got to seal it.
Yeah, may I just add to that, because I absolutely agree. We've often spoke about the printer as being the Rodney Dangerfield of the cybersecurity world. Nobody pays attention or gives it any credence, and yet that printer is connected to everything.
Yep.
Everything on your network. And by the way, we're moving in the direction of what's called IoT, the Internet of Things, right? And people say, oh, well, you know, why does my light bulb need any protection? I don't care if somebody actually goes and turns it on and off when I'm not in the house. It's not the turning on and off. It's connected to your network. And now we have the weakest point on your network. Once I'm in your network, I'm in. So everything needs protected. Absolutely. The weakest link is where they're going to attack.
Like your thermostat.
Yes.
Building management systems have been really, really prone to attack. So, yeah.
Yeah, the target attack came in through the HVAC system.
Thank you.
We'll all sleep well tonight.
Oh, yeah, this is cheery. Al, do you have any particular questions or comments from your perspective?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of piggyback off what Kerry was talking about in regards to the passwords. I really liked his suggestion there, how he puts them in foreign languages. I can't tell you how many times I've been out on a search warrant where when we get to the computer, we lift up the keyboard, or you look under the mouse pad and there's the password. In the military, my experience has been, because we have access to so many different systems, a lot of people write them in a book. And instead of keeping that book on their person, it's in their desk.
Yeah.
And, it's done alphabetically as well. So when you go to, like, you go under D for DHS, you can see the last 4 or 5 passwords they use as they continue to make a new list. So we don't need to make it easy for them, because even in the law enforcement world, you got the burglars that go in the house and to take the guns, but they also capture the passwords and sell that information, and that's used by hackers. Yep. The other thing too deals with photocopy machines and the ability to hack into those once you destroy them to retrieve information that's been scanned or photocopied. But no, good points. Enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Al. And Kevin, I'd like to come back to the issue of election security. So when you I know you move through things very quickly, but you talked about the sort of physical security, and both of these are in the two different RAND reports, which we will send out. You talked about the sort of integrity of the election voting system, and then you talked about the influence campaign that's going on. From your perspective of looking at those two reports, on an individual basis, what's the takeaway? What are the things that we should be most cautious about as we go into voting in now less than 4 weeks? And what can we do to protect ourselves and the integrity of our own vote?
You know, it's a great question, and I besides turning off your TV, which I highly recommend, because sadly, the sophistication of Russia's approach, and anybody that went through, and I've had a lot of dialogue because I just pushed this report out to my network, and my inbox blew up. Russia is seeking to drive us apart, and we have a large number of media outlets that are getting sucked in and being played, to the point that our campaigns are being played as well. So I think at the core of this is understanding that there is a lot of misinformation, and you need to kind of move back to what are the core principles and values of the elected officials that you're looking at and analyzing. I think it's also very important for all of us to recognize that there are, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but there are forces that stand to gain regardless of who gets elected, both in our Congress, our Senate, perhaps not so much from a local standpoint, but there is some influence there. I believe that our election system has a degree of integrity, and there's probably more emphasis being placed on that integrity now than it ever has been in the past. And there are very, very strong, powerful forces, both trying to divide us, but also there are strong countervailing forces looking to make our elections as accurate as possible. There will be certainly examples of mistakes and errors, but at the end of the day, I think we are going to have a good election. We're not going to, contrary to our desire for instant gratification, we're not going to have an answer right away. I think it's going to probably take us at best a week to 10 days, unless it is a massive landslide, and I don't see that happening. So I hope that's kind of answered questions. I think we will have election integrity, but the mainstream media as well as social media are going to amplify any potential discord, because there are very powerful forces at work trying to divide this nation.
And Kevin, may I jump in there and just simply, I completely agree with you. The damage to this country can be done by getting the population, getting us citizens to lose faith in the entire process and the entire system. Doesn't matter who wins. If we lose faith in our system, we're in trouble. And we have to, right, and the media is...
they're being played.
They're being played, they're being rewarded for coming out with, entertaining us with extreme stories. Let's look around at the people around us and not lose faith in the American people.
Yeah, this is Charles. I'll agree with you on that. I think you Kerry, you said it very poignantly at the very beginning. Don't check critical thinking at the door. That ability to reason. I'm a university professor as well as a retired Intel analyst from the USIC, and that's exactly what I think between the media as well as what I see within our university students, and most of my students are adult learners, so they are already practitioners, and that ability to think critically and reason what they're hearing, they're reading and also what they're also thinking is significantly lacking. And yes, having that ability to focus again and go, okay, what is it that I'm really seeing and I'm hearing, and what does that really mean? So yes, I completely agree with you.
Thank you, Charles, and Kerry and Kevin. I think this was really helpful. I have just put up the last slide that Mike sent us. That is the instructions or the take home, the 3 Ps of voting from DHS and FBI, and they're, be prepared, participate, and be patient. It's going to be a very different process this year, but if we follow that, vote early. We have early voting in Nevada. If you get your mail-in ballot, mail it in immediately, vote early in early voting, be prepared, participate, be part of the process because this is your election, and then be patient as we bring the results together. And through all that, trust your sources of information, and be wary. I know for this audience, it's probably easier. Be wary of social media and other sources that you don't have validated. I will certainly send out the reports, the RAND reports, as well as the presentation material from today. So thank you very much for your contributions. And I look forward to seeing everyone at our next presentation on the 29th of this month, when Al and Charles will be talking more about how information gets to local responders to respond to things like extremism attacks of various sorts. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and please stay safe.